Welcome to the Talk of Simsbury. My name is Dominique Avery. Today, the talk is about Weatogue. If you're fairly new to town, as many people are, you may have thought you moved to Simsbury. And suddenly you realize you hear people talking about West Simsbury, Tarryville, and someplace called Weatogue, as though they were entirely separate from Simsbury. Well, they sort of were. And today we're going to talk about one of those places, Weatogue. Where is it? If you were paying attention to the introduction of this program, you will have seen a group of photos about landmarks that include landmarks of Weatogue, and that they shall help you place it. So you would have seen the Civil War Monument, the White Memorial Fountain, Abigail's, and Weatogue even has its own zip code and post office. And now there's a book about Weatogue called Memories of Weatogue and Beyond. My guests today are two lifelong residents of Weatogue, Mary Pringle Mitchell and June Hogblom McKay, right? They are here to talk about the book, which they launched at a special event at the Simsbury Historical Society in September. Mary and June, thank you so much for coming. I'm delighted to have you here. You know, Mary just said, joking, she said before we went on the air that she was, that there were celebrities. And I said, basically, you're on a book tour, right? This is your first television interview, part of your book tour. So before I actually ask how the book came about, I wanted to ask if you really are a lifelong resident, and if I may be so rude, to ask how long you've been here. In other words, how old you are, Mary.
Well, of course, the fresh answer is I've been here all my life. But I'm 92, and have always lived. I originally lived in Weatogue. Now I live in West Simsbury, and but I guess you'd call me a native.
Absolutely. June, how about you? Same question. Lifelong?
I'm lifelong. I've lived here 81 years. I spent 1 year in Farmington. The first year we were married, and then moved back to Weatogue and never left.
So that really is, you both are really old timers. And you have now produced this wonderful book. We showed a picture of it in the introduction. And so I need to know, how did this come about? Who got the idea, and how did all of this happen?
Well, Kevin Gray, who was then the president of the Historical Society, he knows I've always been into stories. And I'm a gerontologist, so I've done a lot of work with stories and realized the benefit of them for a legacy. Everybody should keep stories of their family to pass on. So Kevin called me up and he said, "Hey Mary, how about interviewing all the old timers in Simsbury?" I said, "You gotta be kidding." I said, "Simsbury's not the little town it used to be, but I'll do Weatogue." So that's how it all started. And then I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do that by myself? So I called up June, and if ever there's a native of Weatogue, it's June. And she used to live in the old schoolhouse, and I lived right up the street where our Volvo showroom is today. That's where my home was. So we lived within walking distance of one another. And then Helen Musinski, I called her up, and she used to live next to South School on Pine Hill, and so she had a lot to offer too. And so that's how we started working together.
So what was your reaction when Mary called you?
Well, at first I thought, well, I've never written anything, and how's this going to work? And the first meeting we had quite a response. It was held at my house, and a lot of people came to the meeting. All of them, of course, said they would write stories and so forth and so on. But some of those stories we're still waiting for.
We're still waiting for you. We wrote them.
Isn't that the way it always is? Right. A lot of enthusiasm, but not so much
Right.
follow through. Right. So let me go back a step and ask, what does Weatogue mean? Do you know?
June's going to answer.
Yes, I can tell you that. Weatogue was a name that the Indians actually gave the area. They called it Weatogue, and it was two words. Wit meaning place. No, wit was meaning home, excuse me. And og meaning place. So the Indians knew the area as home place. And the English settlers pronounced it Weatogue as one word. And that's where the name came from.
So what did Weatogue look like, let's say, when you were 2 years old, 90 years ago, or when you first remember? Maybe you don't remember when you were 2, but maybe when you were 4 or 5. What did it look like? Was it dirt roads or paved roads, or?
Well, I'll tell you, I told you that my home was where the Volvo showroom is now, and June just lived just down. Well, we're 11 years difference in age, right?
Yes.
And I was fascinated by her when she was a baby. So I used to push my wicker doll carriage over there. And her mother used to let me put her in my doll carriage, and I'd push her up and down Canal Street. Can you imagine that happening today?
No.
We'd all be arrested. But
Child
there wasn't any
abuse.
traffic.
Right, child abuse.
There was very little traffic. Very little traffic. If you had one car in the family, you were lucky.
Yeah.
And you didn't drive the car because nobody had the money to buy gas.
Yeah.
So and also the roads were not what they are today.
Yeah.
They were almost dirt roads, and therefore you just didn't go very far.
Yeah.
That's true. That wasn't in Simsbury. My mother grew up in Germany, but there were hardly any cars. And she and her brother, maybe between 1915, 16, around there, their big game, the big excitement of their lives was sitting on the sort of stairs of their house and waiting for cars to come by and counting them.
Yeah. Isn't that
There were
something?
so few.
Yeah.
And I mean, now.
Well,
it's
our big
unbelievable.
thing was taking the bus, very seldom, but taking the bus to Hartford to go to G. Fox and Company. That was the big outing. And I tell my grandchildren that, and they say, "Is that as far as you went?"
So, Mary, the Mitchell name is known in town as a car dealership, and I understand that it was actually started by your father, Robert Pringle.
Yes.
Where did your father come from? And tell me the story of the dealership.
My dad, it was about 1914. He came to this country, as he said, with all he had was hope in his pocket, and as most of the immigrants did at that time. And so through a very intricate, winding road, he ended up in the charity ward at Hartford Hospital with rheumatoid arthritis. The freezing conditions on the boat froze his feet,
Where
and
did he come
the doctor thought he would never walk again.
Where did he come from?
Scotland.
Scotland.
Edinburgh, Scotland. And so this doctor knew Mrs. Kane, who lived she lived down the Weatogue section, and she said she would take my father in as a boarder, which she did. And then her son was called to World War I, Joe Kane, and so Joe asked my father if he'd take care of his repair shop, automobile shop, while he was at the war. Then he came back from the war, wanted his shop back, so my father just went way down on Canal Street, rented a cow barn from Mr. Genlot, Bessie the cow and all, and that's where he started Pringle's Garage. It was just repairs. And then during the Depression, where he ever got the courage to do this, I don't know. He moved up to our present location, and it's been a series of additions and additions. And then when my dad died, he died in '56 of cancer, and things were going pretty much downhill at that time. And so that's when my husband and I stepped in, and the Simsbury Bank. And it was sink or swim, and we managed to swim. And so gradually, as the boys came into the business got changed to Mitchell Auto Group, because we have a lot of franchises now.
Right, you started as a repair garage, and then your father expanded it to sell cars.
And my father's first franchise was the Oakland.
Oakland.
Yeah. And when Walter, when we took over, that's when he stuck his neck out and had seen the Swedish Volvo down in New York, and he haunted the Volvo people, haunted them for that franchise.
That was your husband, Walter.
That was my husband. Yeah. And the book we did in memory of Walter.
Right,
too.
I saw that, and I was hoping that you would mention it. I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
June, you wrote a piece called Memories of Railroad Days Gone By, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about the role of the railroad in Simsbury and how people used to come to Simsbury for summer vacations. Tell us a little bit about that piece that you wrote and your memories of that.
Well, the railroad actually ran right through the center of Weatogue. So it didn't matter which side of the street you lived on, you were beside the railroad track. In the days of probably the late 1800s and early 1900s, people would come from New York and New Haven or the cities, and they had summer homes in Weatogue. So many of the homes that are still there started off as summer homes for people in the cities. As years went by, a lot of businesses were in Weatogue, and the railroad became the lifeline for their products. If they needed lumber, it would come in by rail and put on a side rail, and the businesses would unload it. Then the boxcars would be picked up again and brought back. And now it has turned into the rails to trails.
Right.
So it's always been there, and yet it has evolved into what we need now rather than what it was.
Only I have to say I'm a big fan of the railroads and trolleys, and I think that the United States made a terrible mistake by giving all of that up.
did.
That's my own view.
Yep.
And it was very, very sad because now it's just so hard to get from place to place, and it's only by cars. And Mary, another one of your contributions is about Dr. Owen Murphy.
Oh.
And if people know the name now, it's because one of the elderly housing complexes in the north end of town is named after him. But he was a real country doctor. I want you to talk a little bit about it. I'm sure you have memories too, but why don't you start, Mary?
June lives right next door to where he lived.
Really?
Yeah. So we had so many stories of Dr. Murphy that instead of writing an article, we could have written a book. Somebody should have written a book about him and called it The Old Country Doctor, because he was one of a kind. And so I interviewed his daughter, who's still alive, his youngest daughter. She lives up in Otis, and that's where I got a lot of the information, and then I got a lot of it from various people. But we could have written the whole book just on Dr. Murphy. So he used to charge $2 if he thought you could afford it. And of course, during the Depression, he accepted chickens and potatoes and whatever else. And he never took a vacation. And he was on call 24 hours a day. And he was just one of a kind. But one of his daughter told me the funniest story, talk about the railroad. He was right across the street from the railroad. And the engineer was having some problems, and he heard that Dr. Murphy was a very good doctor. He drove the train, stopped the train right in the middle of the tracks, just left it running, ran over to Dr. Murphy, had him treat him, went back, started up the train, went on his way.
Something else you could probably be arrested for these days.
Oh, of course.
So did you also go to, was he the only doctor?
No, he wasn't the only doctor in town, but he was the only one in the village. And he would treat, we would be playing baseball in the field and somebody would get hit by a ball or get cut or something. And there was no hesitation. We would just bring them over to Dr. Murphy and he would patch them up, never asking permission from parents or anything else. And in those days, that was perfectly fine. And other than that, it was, if you were sick, you went to Dr. Murphy.
Yeah.
And he would take care of all kinds of things.
Did he make house calls?
Yeah,
Oh,
yes.
yes. Oh, my goodness, yes. And tell them about the big bottles of pills he had.
He had big bottles of pills of different kinds. And after he examined you and took care of you, he would usually take some envelopes that were probably the size of an envelope that you'd get from the bank, the little envelope. And he would put a handful of pills in one and a handful of pills in the other. And then he would hand them to you and say, take these. There was no when, how, or why. You just received a
We didn't even know what
bunch
they
of
were.
pills.
Yeah.
That could never happen
Never
today.
happen
Probably
today.
it's a good thing. June, let me stick with you for a minute. You wrote a piece called Memories of Growing Up in Weatogue, and you talked about playing in the field. It had lots of details about games you played, and I thought it would be sort of interesting for parents, for younger parents now, to hear a little bit about what kinds of things kids did to have fun in those days.
Well, for one thing, we didn't have organized sports. So we made our own fun. And everyone in the village, all the adults, looked out for all the kids. You knew everyone. You could go to anyone's house, knock on the door, or not even knock on the door. Walk in and say hello, and they always gave you cookies and milk or whatever. And you'd sit in to visit with them. We would play baseball, and it would be just a bunch of kids, all ages, throw the bat, go hand over hand to see who was going to pick the first person. And we would end up playing a baseball until it was too dark to play. We also played touch football. Once in a while there'd be tackle football, but that wasn't the greatest. And we just rode our bikes from morning until night. We'd go out to the town pools and bring a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and spend the entire day there. Now, our parents never seemed to worry about us.
They didn't.
We'd leave in the morning,
Yeah.
come home at night,
Yeah, you'd show up.
and they just thought it was normal.
Yeah. And we used to swim in the river, too. Oh, Farmington River. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And we don't like it anymore when kids do that.
No.
I mean, they couldn't do it this summer because there was no water in the river.
Yeah.
But
Right.
Different world.
it's a totally different
Yeah.
world.
It
Yeah. So
seemed-
you did you roller skate? I mean, I don't know,
We
it's-
ice skated.
Ice skated.
We ice skated on what was called the swamp.
Yeah.
And it was down behind Miss McCann's house.
Yeah.
And also Miss Smith's house.
Yeah.
And everyone would ice skate. There again, as soon as it got cold enough and the water would freeze, and sometimes it would freeze early enough and fast enough that it was clear ice. And that was the most fun because you could look through and see fish or whatever was underneath the
Fascinating.
ice. That was fun. But everybody ice skated. And there again, we would build a bonfire, sometimes bring marshmallows and have marshmallows or even a hot dog and on a roll. And we would do this for all day long.
Now, where is that pond? I mean, is it?
It's still there, but nobody ever uses it. It's really a runoff from the river.
There's
And
a
it's-
picture in the book
There's a
of
picture
Miss
of the-
Smith. Miss Smith's house. There's a picture in here. It's a little story I wrote, and it was behind her house.
Yeah.
Right in Weatogue. Yeah.
So near the post office or near the Linden House or on the other side?
Well, it's really down from where the River View
where the-
entertainment
yeah.
thing. It just a couple of houses down from there.
Oh,
Yeah.
Interesting. Mary, you tell a story about your uncle, George Pringle, who owned a gas station in Weatogue. And I read that he had a very famous customer come buy gas from him. Can you tell us that
yeah.
story?
Yeah, well, June remembers my Uncle George very well because all the kids also waited for the school bus, and Uncle George knew all of them. And he was quite a character. But anyhow, the thing he loved to tell was about how Katharine Hepburn had a relative at Ethel Walker School, and she come out once a week. She always bought her gas from my Uncle George. And they had big conversations, and believe we all heard about it. And that was the highlight of my Uncle George's day.
Yeah, and she lived in Hartford, so
Hartford,
it was not
yes,
that, right?
yeah.
And she drove her own car, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, she was a very
Yeah.
forward-thinking woman.
Yes, she certainly was, yeah.
I love that story. I think that
Yeah.
was so cute. June, you tell your father's story. He came from Sweden, if I understand correctly. How did he end up in Simsbury?
Oh, he came from Sweden at the age of 16. The conditions in Sweden at that time were there wasn't any employment, and he had been working on the North Sea in very harsh conditions with the fishermen, and decided that he could have a better life in America. His brother had come to the United States earlier. They had been lent money by their aunt who was here in the U.S., and they paid her back. And Eric, his brother, had gone to Iowa, and the Dodge family employed him.
The Dodge family in Simsbury.
In
Weatogue.
Weatogue, right.
Well, that's how he came to Weatogue,
Yeah.
was their daughter, Lydia Dodge Montgomery, moved to Weatogue, and she took him, Eric,
from
with
Iowa?
him from Iowa.
Oh.
And so when my father came, he came to Weatogue because he already had his brother here. And that's how he
Ended up
in Weatogue.
From Sweden to Iowa to Weatogue.
But he didn't go to Iowa. He came directly.
Oh, he came direct.
to-
Oh, because his brother
Yes.
had already come
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this whole thing about Weatogue, people say, well, what is Weatogue? And I know there are people in Tarryville who are really into Tarryville.
Yeah.
So how did it relate to Simsbury, or was there a Simsbury?
Well, the kids that lived in Weatogue went to South School, which is now an office building.
Right.
And we went there through 6th grade. Then we all went to Central Grammar School. And then from Central Grammar School, we went down the hill to the high school, which is now the town hall.
Right, but that was part of
we just
Simsbury,
kind of
right?
all blended. And we all used to come to the Eno Hall for the movies on Friday and Saturday night for 25 cents. So, and we had Girl Scouts up there and everything. So Weatogue and Simsbury did
communicate.
We did join, yeah.
You know what? We've run out of time.
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
Look how fast
Yeah.
it went. There's so many more interesting stories. I don't know whether the public knows that Chrissy DeSopo, who has the flower house in Avon, grew up here, and she has some amazing stories in here about climbing the bridge. In any case, it's a wonderful book, and I recommend it highly. I want to thank everyone here at SCTV behind the scenes, like cameramen Joe Giorgenti and Jim Dempsey, for getting the show on the air. Thanks especially to my guests, Mary Mitchell and June McKay, for sharing their wonderful memories. And finally, thank you for joining us. If you missed any portion of the show, you can always find it on our website at simsburytv.org. And you can buy the book at the Simsbury Historical Society. Their gift shop is open Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays from 12 noon to 4 p.m., and I think it's $15. I'm Dominique Avery. See you next time for the Talk of Simsbury. Since 1984, SCTV has been the place to turn in Simsbury to watch local government in action. But we're more than local government and school meetings. SCTV is the only place where you can check out all the candidates in local elections. We have high school sports and exercise classes. Other shows keep you up on health, finance, poetry, music, and Simsbury hot topics. Now we need your help. Simsbury Community TV is embarking on a major capital fundraising campaign to bring SCTV into the 21st century. We've received a generous grant from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, but now we must match it. We want everyone to watch us on TV or on our website, but even if you never do, please help so that we can continue to keep your government open and you informed. Someday, when there's a crisis, you will want SCTV to be there.
Hi, my name is Charles Wolfe, President of Charles J. Wolfe Associates in Simsbury, and I hope you'll join me in supporting SCTV. Since 1984, your connection to your town, your schools, and your government.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.